Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Hi folks, welcome back to Through a Scottish Prism. Hope you and yours are well. This is me back in familiar surrounds. I'm back in my own home after my wee holiday with my family. It was wonderful, but great to be back. And I hope you're all keeping well. This is budget week, and it's a heck of a week. So we've got lots to talk about as always. So let's bring in the guys, and then we'll get started. We've got the Coatbridge Cavalier, Phil Boswell. Mr. Boswell, how are we?
Yeah, very, very good. My apologies to everybody in the team. I've delayed the start a wee bit because I was, after work, I went out for a couple of glasses of wine and ended up in a pool hall in the African quarter, eating African chicken and some funky stuff. I don't know what it was. So if I need to be excused for the toilet, please excuse me.
There's really no answer to that. And we've got our favourite lawyer up in Clickman, of course, our Eva. You'll not been eating African food, Eva?
I certainly have not. I don't live as charmed in existence as Phil, but I do live in the wee county, the jewel at the heart of Scotland, and every day I look out my window at the Ochil Hills, so beat that.
Exactly. And
I used to live in India and was building a bridge across the Ganges to get to Kathmandu from the holy city of Bodh Gaya, and used to look at the Himalayas a lot, so shove it, Eva.
And then we've got our man from the place where they put brown sauce and not vinegar on their chips. It's Mr. Quinnan from Edinburgh. How are we?
Very well. I've missed you all the past couple of weeks.
Yeah, we're glad you're back and your COVID's over. You feeling better?
Aye, yeah.
It's a bit of a killer when you get that. I got that when I was in Germany for the Euros. Not pleasant. I'd avoided it till then, but yeah, what can you do? At least you're back.
Aye.
You're back. I'm glad to have you back. You've been missed. So let me start. The budget this week, folks. Phil, that's a wee preempt. When we were waiting in the budget, there was lots of leaks and everything, but here's the important part of the budget. You can tell us how much of this is true.
All of our plans are fully costed and fully funded. And that means no tax rises for working people. We're not going to be raising tax on working people.
We will not raise taxes on working people.
We're not putting up taxes on working people.
The Labour government will not raise income tax, will not raise national insurance contributions, and will not raise VAT.
We're not going to increase tax on working people, and that means
that Labour will not be putting up taxes on working people. But no, we don't think that we should be raising taxes on working people.
there'll be no additional taxes on households under a Labour government. Let me be absolutely clear. We will not raise tax for working people.
We will not raise taxes on working people.
We have said we're not raising taxes on working people.
We're not going to be increasing taxes on working people.
We're not increasing taxes on working people.
That is a commitment not to increase taxes on working people. I don't believe it's there to raise taxes on working people.
We will not further increase personal taxes
to lower that burden on working people.
There's nothing in our manifesto which requires additional taxes.
It's complete garbage. We will not be raising taxes on working people. We're not going to be raising.
So, Phil, they weren't going to raise taxes on working people. Is that true? You're on mute, mate. I'm just taxing you £1.
Yeah, no, you've just taxed me £1. I forgot I had my main screen on, so my mouse was up there to our missus.
So is it true? Is it true?
Nonsense. There's a couple of things. The first thing, fully costed. No, it's not. They're never fully costed. You never produce the figures. When I was in the Treasury team for SNP when a few budgets came out, and what we were doing was sitting there waiting for it to come out, and you get a full transcript of the budget very, very, very shortly, immediately after it's been done. And you go through it and you look for, to be honest, everybody just looks for brownie points to score points. So is it fully costed? Almost certainly not. There'll be some figures to back some of this stuff up, but it's not detailed. You're not getting at the level of detail that would survive a forensic audit, for example. No additional tax on working people. Well, see for yourself. How much more expensive is life going to be after this? Well, much more for pretty much everybody. And also define working people. You need to be careful about definitions when it comes to that type of thing. So basically, working people is a soundbite. It's a marketing scheme. It's Labour pandering to the stereotypical, the preconceived conception that Labour are a party of the working people. They ceased to be that when they kicked Jeremy Corbyn out. Simple as that. They are not a party of the working people. They're just a different cheek of the same arse that is the Tories. And so what you can do, you can barely get a credit card between both cheeks, and that's extremely accurate analogy because that's what it's all about, money and profit for those who control these shysters. So no, it's a con. The actual budget itself, I mean, do you want to have a quick look at that, Roddy?
The things that would be of interest to our people in Scotland, that's the things. But just before I do that, I could just say to you, you say that, when they get rid of Jeremy Corbyn, I would suggest they stop being socialists when they brought in Neil Kinnock. From there, it's been a steady sway to the right the whole way.
Yeah, the days of the ragged trouser philanthropists, and was it 47, the election that won it for Labour, when socialism meant socialism, not pseudo-communism or whatever the hell they've redefined it as now. And that's the problem we face. The redefinition and when you look at this and you actually understand what socialism is, it's about looking after your own and looking after folk. It's not about communism. And it's certainly not about Trotskyism. It's not about all of the other genres. Basically, we're a small country, should have a nimble economy, and should look after our own. Everybody that lives and works here in Scotland should have a fair crack at the whip. We should be operating on the model that is operated by Scandinavia, where it's difficult to be a billionaire, but everybody's got the opportunity to be wealthy, and the basics, the taxation is high, but everybody does well. It's a great place to live. I was fortunate enough to live in Norway, work for Statoil. There's lots of models out there to show how it's done. Britain is not doing it properly. That is crystal clear, and it's only going to get worse, Roddy.
Yeah, remember, as I said last week, they keep telling us to pull our belt in another notch, and I can't pull in any more notches. Lloyd, but I mean, the great swap they gave us a penny off a pint. So you'll walk past 17 boozers to get to one that's giving you the penny. It's not worth the publicans even taking the penny off, is it? That's just, again, another soundbite. It's a load of nonsense.
It's pathetic. It's a desperate appeal to Nigel Farage's beer-swilling fools of England, On a serious note, though, Roddy, I mean, This mantra of we will not put up taxes for working people without a definition is despicable in itself. But one of the things that affects all of us in a strange kind of a way is the fact that the increase on national insurance contributions from employers in the context of Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, where we're all subject to the concept of the block grant, that effectively is a cut. It's a cut built in, because what you're effectively doing is you've pointed out to each and every one of the structures that's in receipt of money from the block grant that they have to use a certain part of that to cover the national insurance increase. So in real terms, the delivery of service is being cut back. For this, the pretense by the Labour Party that they're not taxing working people because the national insurance contribution comes from the employer. It's a very, very shoddy version of Smoke and Mirrors by Rachel from Accounts.
Yeah, there's no one quite better than the Labour Party, though, Eva, for Smoke and Mirrors. We've done it, and a few topics we'll be covering this week. But this budget, were you impressed by it?
I think from a Scottish perspective, it was very disappointing because there was fanfare, particularly from Labour people in Scotland, to the effect that this is the greatest settlement that Scotland's seen for years. It's the highest ever payment to the Scots, when the reality is, as Lloyd has said, in real terms, the money coming to Scotland has gradually, over a period of time, consistently reduced. so that the money that's actually available for Scotland to spend is becoming lower and lower, and that's why public services, to an extent, are suffering. What I thought was really interesting, though, it was an item, I think it's basically an open letter in The Guardian on Halloween from a number of people led by Jeremy Corbyn. I think there's about 100 signatories in total. Jeremy Corbyn, Independents, Plaid Cymru, and what they're saying is this budget, this Labour budget, is austerity by another name. And the introduction says, Labour's first budget punishes the working people they claim to support. They promised to deliver real change after 14 years of Tory rule, but they've broken that promise. And the letter has reference to public sector cuts, a tax on the worst off, a refusal to redistribute wealth. And they go on with a demand, and the demand is that they want Labour to introduce wealth taxes, abolish the two-child benefit cap, stop attacking welfare recipients, reverse cuts to winter fuel, restore in England the £2 bus cap, and invest in a Green New Deal. Now, the interesting thing for Scotland is that seems to me to be a left-of-centre socialist, very caring, very sensible, very egalitarian approach to adopt. The signatories to that letter do not include the SNP. What is there about the demands in that letter that the people of Scotland in the main would disagree with? And that leads me on to what the heck are the SNP doing in Westminster, because they're certainly not doing anything to promote the cause for which they were elected, the independence cause. And that in turn makes me wonder, what is the motivation of the SNP now? Because in line or in addition to the budget and how that would deal with finances throughout the UK, it was confirmed that approximately £1.4 billion is going to come from Westminster to local authorities in Scotland and bypass Holyrood. And if that is not undermining the very existence of the Scottish Parliament, what else is it? Because this direct contribution to local authorities, who decides who gets how much money? How do they calculate how much Clackmannanshire gets in comparison to what, for example, Aberdeenshire gets? Is it done in terms of areas of high deprivation? Is it done in terms of numbers of population? Is it done about need? What do we take into account? What is the money for? Is it for housing? Is it for education? Is it for the things that are already devolved to the Scottish Parliament? Or is it a backdoor way of trying to boost the Labour vote in time for the next Holyrood election?
You got it.
Dollar, that's exactly what it is. And this is exactly why the SNP have got to be dragged kicking and screaming to a united campaign for our country's independence. It's why we have been banging on for years now about the need for a better together approach from those who genuinely support independence. It is now or never. We don't know when the next Holyrood election is going to be. If the Scottish budget isn't passed, it might be a lot sooner than 2026. And those who favour independence better get the boots on the ground and get the campaign for independence underway without delay.
Absolutely. We've gone on for the last few weeks about the winter fuel payment, Phil. 1.6 billion. Two of the things they announced in the budget was, one, that they're increasing the defence spending. They found money for that. It's gone up to 2.5% from 2%. They're also committed to giving 3 billion every year. That's twice the amount of the winter fuel payment to Kiev, to the Ukrainian extreme government there. As you said, we should be looking after our own first, should we not? Rather than feeding that lot.
Yeah. I mean, the first point to make there is if they're increasing defence funding, it's actually called attack funding, and sponging is more appropriate because every dollar you give to Ukraine gets sponged off and people steal it. It's estimated by some reporters that around 1/3 of the funding to Ukraine has went to the front line because it was one of the most, if not the most corrupt country in Europe before the recent events, and it is a proxy war that is being funded by the West, created by the West, against Russia, who are European, or part, some of it is, and we should be allied to. No, we shouldn't be fighting these guys. This is appalling, absolutely appalling. One of the reasons it's 1.5% up to 2%, these figures have been cooked quite a few times. I've done a few things with NATO and SHAPE, Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe, when it was SNP, but 2% is the minimum requirement for NATO membership of your GDP you should spend on defence. And really, quite frankly, if Trump gets in and he drops it, the last time I was in a meeting, we talked about if Trump comes in, which is very likely again, and this is what the last time I was there was 2016, just before he in, and I said to the general in charge of SHAPE, we're not here for our Clausewitzian military strategy. We're here because you want to know if the SNP will hit the 2%, hit the 2% minimum requirement, and if Trump drops the 70% funding that NATO currently provide, that America currently provide for NATO, even if everybody hits their 2%, you're still about 20 billion short. He pretty much nodded his head. Yeah, are you in or are you out? And the bottom line was we couldn't say because we're not making these decisions. But I had just argued against you, Roddy, and voted to be within NATO, and said this is the right thing to do. And if we comply with these rules, we will hit the 2%. Which I believe we will, but that's just me speaking. No one here can speak for on behalf of the Scottish Government, even though they represent them, because that decision is yet to be made. So to be quite honest, it's a con. But fanfare, Eva mentioned fanfare. It is a fanfare, Eva, but it's not a fanfare for the common man. Penny off a pint. Reduce the price of pigeon feed. And whippet tax. I mean, it's a scam, an absolute scam. Keep the oiks satiated. That's what it's about. Con, it's a con as in Conservative, all over the back.
Meanwhile, it's come out this week, we know, Lloyd, well, we're funding all these things, that over 1 million of our people, 1 in 5, are struggling, living in poverty. And they're increasing the spending on defence, or it should be offence, and not taxing the rich. A disgusting budget.
Yes, it is. But the whole fact that there are 1 million of our people effectively living in poverty when we are an energy and oil-rich country, part supposedly of the 7th richest country in the world. But the reality is, we have 1 million people in poverty because we are part of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. That's just a straightforward reality. It is not possible to argue that the Union is better for Scotland when effectively close to 1 in 5 of our population are living in poverty. How can it possibly be true that the Union works for the Scots? Now, we have to address this. Either that or we go to our graves in shame. The fact that there are 1 million of our fellow countrymen having to concern themselves on a daily basis with how they spend their money or the little money that they have. Do they eat? Do they eat? Do they get new shoes for the bairns? The ideas of holidays for 1 million people in our country are a thing of the past. We have to find a way that we can get the Scottish National Party leadership to realise that their failure to address the central principal problem of this country, which is the constitutional question, because only when we settle the constitutional question and have control of our own economy will we be able to address the issues of 1 million people in poverty. Now, if John Swinney and his leadership believe that there's some other way of doing it, and I think they think there is another way, which is a coalition with Labour in 2026, well, we need to disabuse them of that thought right here and now. It's essential that people who genuinely understand that only with control of our own economy, which comes with independence, can we address the issue of 1 million people in poverty. And that requires those of us and all of us who support that concept to find a way to get the SNP in its blind stupidity to come in from the cold, to talk to people who want to drive us forward so that we become the independent country that can address these issues rather than tinkering around the edges and complaining about the necessity of mitigating the policies of a foreign country. It's essential that the SNP membership inform their elected members that they need to start listening to other people. They do not have all the wisdom. They do not have the monopoly on the future of our country, though they're pretending and behaving like they do. It's 1 million people out of 6 million. Think about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's extraordinary in a country that, come on, just across the North Sea, there is Norway, with the largest single sovereign wealth fund in the world. Its people have a standard of living that's at least 3 times what we have. They have a quality of life, the vast majority, I'm talking 99.9% of the population, a quality of life that our people, even our richest, can only dream about. And they discovered oil at exactly the same time as we did. But somehow, we, with a population effectively the same size, have 1 million people in poverty. And the last time I saw a figure for Norwegian poverty, it was 0.1% of the population. Independence, nothing less. And Mr. Swinney, it's time you got round the table with people who understand that and bring your party with you.
Yeah. And the unionists, they've got a great way of thinking about it, Eva. And you know, the new leader of the branch office of the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party, Mr. Finlay, he's got a great way of saving money. This is what he wants to do. He'd be happy to see, he says that Scots would be perfectly happy to see the end of free prescriptions. I think he's on drugs.
I don't know who he's speaking to, because I understand that before prescriptions became free, 80% of the population didn't pay for them anyway, and it cost far more to administer a fee charging process than it should have. It was a complete and utter waste of time and effort. But you see, this really concerns me, that somebody like Russell Finlay takes some ill-thought-out remark like that and he gets major publicity out of it, when the hard fact of the matter is that, of course, we have 1 million people in poverty. We have 1 million disabled people in Scotland too. And there is a commonality between these two sets of people, because they coincide with each other, not exactly, but very much so. And when you consider the people that have disabilities or ill health, and you look at issues surrounding poverty, what you know is that poverty is a killer, but poverty creates and it begets ill health. That's partly because of the clear and obvious lack of money, but it's also because of things like poor housing or high fuel costs. We've had a housing emergency declared in Scotland as well as in individual local authorities, and yet John Swinney has still not, as far as we're aware, lifted the phone to Alec Neil to get his advice about how to kickstart a house building programme and really take Scotland somewhere that we ought to have been long ago. We know equally well that in terms of health expenditure, that the more you spend on prevention, the healthier and more productive your population becomes. The last thing that you should be doing is talking about removing universal benefits if you want to live in a civilised country. We should have universal free school meals for nursery, primary, secondary, and I would suggest also college and university students. I would pay homage to Alex Salmond again when he made that pledge 10 years ago that the rocks would melt in the sun if there were ever to be a removal of tuition fees for students in Scotland. Alec understood the needs of the people of Scotland in a way that somebody like Russell Finlay never, ever will, because he's one of these people that pretends to know the price of everything when in fact he knows the value of absolutely nothing. And looking after your people, making sure that they've got access to good health care, access to prescriptions when they need it. And I can do no better than quote my friend Rattlecans, who pointed out the other day when Russell Finlay came out with this nonsense, that she remembers with very, very sad and heavy heart the days when she stood looking in her purse, having to choose between paying for an essential prescription or buying her dinner. Now, if you've been there, if you've spoken to people who have been there, who fear being there again, you would wipe that smile off Russell Finlay's face pretty damn quick.
Yeah, but Russell Finley's one of those guys say, but there's not in poverty. I mean, they've got flat screen televisions and Sky subscriptions and they smoke. So they can't be in poverty. You know, it's that arrogance they've got. But another thing we've been talking, you spoke earlier, Phil, about smoke and mirrors of the Labour Party. Now, when they first muted the thing about GB Energy, we were immediately onto it and cynical, shall we say. We've not been proved wrong. But it's going to be headquartered in Scotland. Oh, great, you're the headquarters. Oh, it's all going to be from Scotland. It's going to be fantastic. But here's the sting in the sail. The SNP are right. The GB Energy chief, the CEO, who's not Scottish, of course, is going to be based in Manchester. And of course, Phil, he won't be sitting in his own house. He'll be surrounded by a staff. The headquarters, in effect, the brass plate may be in Aberdeen, and there may be a skeleton staff, but the headquarters staff and all the meaningful jobs, work and money will be around the CEO in Manchester.
It's the same as Scottish Oil. 96.5% of the oil in the UK continental shelf is in Scotland, and yet most of the jobs are in England. The gas is the same. It's up about 60, it's approaching 70% in Scottish waters, and all new finds will be in Scottish waters. Not quite. There's a couple other ones. There's a couple, one off Cornwall, a few other ones, but most of them are heading out into the Rockall Basin. This is the richest part of the UK, and it's why Britain won't let it go. And it makes it all the more sickening, just sort of touching on the earlier point, the appalling stats from 6 million, 1 million in poverty, 1 in 6, 17%, and it hits kids, single mothers. They suffer. They're the ones that suffer. We suffer. Our society suffers. It's a disgrace. So yeah, no surprise to see this brass plate. That reminds me of the same as the Bank of Scotland, the brass plate in Edinburgh. Yeah. When it was moved south, it was bought, and at least 70% of losses during the prime, whatever it was, the crash, were lost from the Bank of Scotland in London. What they do is they take our good name and reputation, the Scots reputation for being frugal, the fact that we founded the Bank of England, and the fact that we are organised and can deliver and have a disproportionate number of senior professionals in pretty much every discipline that you care to mention, every profession. Fred the Shred era, we must not forget, and we must not ever conscience such an option again. Independence is the answer. Lloyd's right. Stop dancing around the handbags and get down to business. We need full control of the... One day we should do something on this, the 35 or so fiscal and economic levers that are required to run a country's economy. We need control of that, and independence is the only way we can do it. We cannot continue to do what this budget is doing, and every budget has been, in real terms, Lloyd touched on it earlier, an increase in the figure, you see it appears to be, but you make it overall less than inflation. And therefore, in real terms, it's a reduction in costs. Tell me, any business person out there, any business person that's listening, any service provider that's listening, if your funds reduce every single year, what's going to happen to your services if costs continue to increase? You tell us. Think about it. It's patently obvious. Don't listen to the con merchants. And what this is it's a strategy that has been going on forever. And that's why the con is that they're Labour, but they're Conservatives. That's the con. Because the cuts continue. You put the services under duress. It fails. And they come out with a mantra, well, to save it, we'll have to privatise it. And all their mates in Wall Street and the City of London make a profit off of it. And these are the shysters we should be running through. If there were still jewels and you had swords, we should be running these buggers through. I mean, we really need to sort this out. We need to get rid, and I don't mean it in a violent way. As we know, we need to do it through the ballot. And the only thing I would disagree with Lloyd earlier is we need to persuade the leaders of the Scottish National Party. There is no persuading these shysters. They're shysters, they're betrayers, they're con men and women, and we need removed permanently from our... as I said before, if you want to come back into politics and you're genuinely sorry for what you've done for betraying the people of Scotland, then you'll be demoted to sapper, back into the trenches and in your stripes again, because you should not be anywhere near even representing the world leader. You shysters, every bloody one of yous.
Lloyd, were you surprised when it was announced that one, the CEO wasn't going to be a Scot, two, he wasn't going to be based in Scotland, and all his headquarters staff will be down with him in Manchester, and Aberdeen is just smoke and mirrors, isn't it?
I was astonished, Roddy. I was absolutely certain it would be the recreation of the British National Oil Corporation, that huge 12-storey building at the bottom of Argyle Street in Glasgow.
Yep.
That's what I thought was, that must be what's happening. So I was shocked, because my experience of, Scotland and the Union is, they've been so good to us. They've been so good to us. They've looked after us. We've got less motorway than any country of equivalent size in the whole of the northern fucking hemisphere. Oops. And that's the price. That's the price. We had a whole load of politicians who were arguing about whether or not it should be headquartered here, headquartered there, when they never asked, what does it actually do? Does it matter where the blast plate is for what's effectively an investment company that will never produce a watt of energy? But the whole chat beforehand was about this organisation, this energy company. They've even got the cheek to call it GB Energy, when everybody knows it will never produce a single watt of electricity. It's a clearinghouse for investment. And it's a clearinghouse not for the investment of the people. You can't go along and make your own wee contribution and get your part of it. This is for, what Britain depends upon, bringing money from somewhere else in the world and investing it here and claiming that it's part of your great, strong economy. An economy that makes nothing. I mean, in some ways, GB Energy is it really is the crystallization of the nature of industry in the United Kingdom in the early part of the 21st century. It's a place for moving money. It doesn't make things. It doesn't produce things. It just shifts money from one group of people to another group of people, meanwhile missing out the entire population on the way. It all fundamentally comes back again. Independence is the only thing that's going to allow us to address the issues that we have to address. And one of those issues is getting GB out of our energy. That's the fact of the matter. We do not need Great Britain's interference in our production of energy. What we need is our own people involved in it, and that we start selling to the world. That's what we need to do. We've got to cut out the middleman. It's whether the middleman is GB Energy with a CEO in Manchester and a brass plate in Aberdeen, none of it effectively is going to have any real effect on the people of our country. But it will produce a lot of chat for the political classes, and it will produce a lot of chat for the business editors of our newspapers. And that's it. It's all about the internal game of British commerce, which is not commerce. It's just the trading and passing of money. That's all. What does this country make? What does Great Britain make? Fools of itself on the public stage, on the world stage? That would appear to be about the only thing that it's been doing in the past couple of years.
It is. If we create our own electricity, so much electricity, Eva, we give it down south for nothing. They're coming after our water. We know that. We were talking about last week. The hydro they're building and the dams, and there's a shortage of water forecast in England soon, so they're coming for our water. But this doesn't come as a surprise that the GP Energy, this smoke and mirrors, because you mentioned in your last reply that what they were up to was to send money. The money they were sending was to get them votes for 26. But that's what this is about, the smoke and mirrors, to pretend they're doing something with Scottish Energy so they can buy themselves some more votes to try and steal the election in 26.
Well, what we know is if they were really doing something to assist the people of Scotland, what they'd do is, see that 1.4 billion that they're sending north, they would allocate a fair whack of that to repairing and replacing the refinery in Grangemouth. That's what they would do. But you'll have noticed that the word Grangemouth rarely passes the lips of any Labour politician, either in Scotland or in Westminster. And I'm reminded every single time that we talk about this sort of thing that those elected from Scotland to go to Westminster seem to have a particular mentality, which is this: the noblest prospect which a Scotchman ever sees is the high road that leads them to England. And that is the mentality that has infected those elected to represent Scotland at Westminster. And I was particularly unimpressed this week with the performance of Scotland's Labour MPs during the budget, who had to read the party lines, you know, word for word, bit by bit. This is a positive experience for Scotland. This is going to make Scotland a better place, when it was all just utter guff and lies and spin as per usual. As for Anas Sarwar, he's the chap that said the easiest way or the only way to get out of poverty is to work, as if he had never heard of the working poor, for which his party are entirely now responsible, given the attacks in the budget. The fact that you actually describe people as working poor is absolutely shameless, as well as being deadly accurate. And that set of circumstances is happening in our country because John Swinney and others, including his two most immediate predecessors, do not appear to have a cogent plan to take us towards our country's independence. I thought that suddenly somebody had had a rush of blood to the head, because 5 minutes ago I saw a tweet that said the SNP are going to hold a convention on the Constitution. And I thought, wait, what's going on here? And I read it. It's their own convention on their own party constitution. And it's so desperately urgent that it's taking place in March 2025. If that's what they feel about the urgency to amend their own constitution after all the problems that they've had, you can ask yourself, where are their priorities relative to the Constitution of Scotland? Because they don't exist as a priority for that party any longer. If they did, John Swinney would have lifted that phone to a lot of people a long time ago. The fact that he doesn't means that he is guilty of enabling Labour to impose austerity on Scotland indefinitely. It's on his watch and it's his door, and we should all be chapping his door down and telling him to get done the job that he and his colleagues were elected to do. We know support for independence in the country is beyond 52%. What the people need is an objective, a home, a date, a plan, optimism and hope, and renewed spirit and determination that we will turn our country into the country that we know what it can be. When we control our own resources, we will control our own destiny.
Yeah. And as we're saying, with Smoke and Mirrors, Sarwar, he's quite relaxed that the CEO is now going to be down there and all the jobs are going to be down in England. Of course he would. He also, he would do anything for his loyalty lies with England, not with Scotland. It's quite disgusting. But also this week, it was the sad time of Alex Salmond's burial, and there was a lot of people went through to Phil to sign the book of condolences. But we know that the Yes Bikers were banned from coming in to sign the book of condolence because they didn't like their appearance. And also we found that I actually know who that is. We all do know who that is actually going in there. I had a T-shirt made up which says Scotland is a country, not a county. And we're told that it wasn't suitable, it was too political to come in to sign a book of condolence for the great man himself. Quite disgusting. I mean, but they're allowed to walk about with LGBTQ, whatever it is, RSYZ, lanyards, but you're not allowed to wear something like that. Quite ridiculous.
Yeah, it's absolute nonsense, and this is the kind of pettiness that we have. It's come to this, and this is the tragedy here. Instead of having the difficult arguments, the discussions, the debates, where you talk about serious issues and you contend the pros and cons for both sides or three sides or however many sides it's got, and a story often has his story, her story, and the truth somewhere in between. But here we are in a situation where these little dictators get into positions of power, they follow doctrines that are set down by those who would basically keep us on our knees and fighting amongst each other. And that's what we're getting here. To turn up to sign a book of condolence and be rejected because they didn't like your T-shirt or what it said on it, and say that it's political, it's too political, when wearing a lanyard that is expressly political does not exclude you. In a political parliament, in a parliament building that was built with a big public area outside for public debate, for public demonstrations, which were subsequently banned. That tells a story of where we are right now in Scotland. And just as a wee reminder, then I lived and I worked for Statoil in Norway, lived in Stavanger, worked in Aberdeen and Stavanger, and it's now Equinor. The Norwegian fund, the sovereign fund, is currently worth $1.7 trillion. Read it and weep, folks. That's where we should be.
Absolutely. This Lloyd of the political correctness, I would suggest if I appeared at Holyrood with a Union Jack T-shirt on, I bet you I wouldn't be refused entry.
No, you wouldn't, Roddy. I think what this exemplifies is the fact that there's an institutional attitude that permeates from the government, the leaders of the government, through the civil servants, through the parliamentary staff. I mean, I remember when I was in Parliament, and which is right back at the very beginning of it, we had nowhere near the same level of security because we didn't need it. When they moved to Holyrood, suddenly we're having debates about whether we need to have bomb-proof doors, whether or not we need to have exclusion zones around the building to prevent it being attacked by suicide bombers or car bombers or this, that, or the other. Now, this was about people getting way, way beyond themselves, seeing themselves as being considerably more important than they actually were. And what's happened this week with the treatment of those people attempting to give their condolences on the tragic death of Alex Salmond is that same attitude again. They think they are more important. They have no concept that the Parliament serves the people. That's the whole central point of democracy. And when you get to the stage where people are looking through your bag or searching you in the fairly invasive manner that they do at the Scottish Parliament, for which there is actually no requirement other than there are people in that building, both in the government parties and in the other parties, who do not like criticism. They see that T-shirt as criticism. They see the yes bikers because they are the yes bikers. That's criticism. It's a criticism of the SNPs, criticism of all the unionist parties, and these people don't like criticism. And then the way that then becomes reflected in the behaviour of the staff of the Parliament, who see it as their job, they are the gatekeepers. They must protect these poor individuals from these wicked people that want to say bad things about them. Now, when we compare that attitude this week over the way the transgender activists were treated by both the parliamentary staff, by the members of the Parliament, when they were in the public gallery, where the official rules are you're not allowed to whoop and holler, right? You get thrown out for it. They didn't. They were allowed to express themselves fully and completely because they weren't criticising.
Mm-hmm.
So the parliamentary staff allowed them to do that because they're not criticising. They're supporting. And the problem is there are far, far too many people in that building, both elected members, staff members, civil servants and security staff, who think because they are in the Parliament that they are above the people. And that tells you that we have a fundamental failure in our education system. Because what they should understand is they are the servants of the people. Every single one of them. They don't make rules for people when you're a security guard at the Scottish Parliament. and stop thinking that you do.
Yeah. I remember there's a book of condolences down south for Diana. I don't think they were worried about dress code there, were they, Eva? I think people could have turned up in anything they'd have been allowed in. And I just don't understand why someone with a T-shirt saying that was one of the last things that Alex Salmond said, we're a country, not a county. I don't see how anyone could be offended by that.
Well, let us remind ourselves and everybody watching that since Alex's unfortunate and untimely and quite frankly tragic passing, he has been recognised internationally as a unique champion of Scotland and the greatest First Minister our country ever had. And that is not just because he won us that referendum. He obviously got us the referendum, rather. It's because of all the other things that he did. It's because he was a person who was able to speak and to engage audiences of all different sorts of people from different walks of life and from different status, if you like. And it was because he was intelligent, he was educated, he was companionable, but most of all, his heart was in the right place because he fought always for Scotland and for humanitarian values. He was a good man. People who knew him know that. But to think for a minute that there are some people who say that it's somehow wrong, or you have to hide the fact that Scotland is actually a country, not a county, suggests there's something very rotten in the state of our democracy. And never was that clearer on that day, except for the day when women wearing suffragette colours were told to remove them and be ejected from the Parliament if they refused so to do. That at a time when a First Minister was female, who spoke constantly about her support for women, leading a party who had all women shortlists. And yet this was sullied by what was the definition of a woman, because men were being allowed to invade women's spaces, and it was somehow wrong and inappropriate for women to celebrate what it meant to have been a suffragette and to wear the suffragette colours. And yet, while that was happening, you had the really particularly unedifying spectacle of a woman who is now the Equalities Minister playing hopscotch in the hall, in the corridor, showing off on video online the fact that she was wearing in her training shoes LGBTQ plus laces. It's one law for one side of that position or that debate and a different law for the other side of that. And it is completely unfair, wrong-minded and entirely inappropriate. This carry on with Alec and the Book of Condolences and what people could or couldn't wear is extending that dreadful debate. I think the reason the Yes Bikers were denied entrance was because some of them had salt tires and some of them had salt tire badges. On what planet are you not allowed to portray, use, display the flag of your own country? You know, this is back to the days of Gordon Brown referring to Scotland as North Britain. That's coming back again. We know this. That's why it's GB Energy using Scottish resources. But it is shameful, shameless, and so disappointing. I suppose you maybe got onto it, but just when I mentioned the Equalities Minister, you saw this week that she made a fool of herself, not for the first time, in the debate when she was asked about the genders. We spoke last week about the 24 gender list of guidance.
Yeah, let me stick that up right away, Eva.
What its position is on how many genders there are.
Minister Colcab-Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Government's position is that of the law. In law, people are either male or female.
Rachel Hamilton.
I'm pleased to hear that Colcab-Stewart agrees with the First Minister that there are two genders. But in official guidance published this month, the SNP government claimed that there are dozens of different genders. Dozens. This doesn't make sense to people in mainstream Scotland. It seems ridiculous for this to be the focus of the Scottish Government. Why is the Scottish Government wasting so much time and resource on fringe obsessions?
Yes. Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Government did not claim that. The Scottish Government recently updated its guidance for public bodies on collecting data on sex and gender to include a coding framework for free text responses. The framework is there to help official statistic producers to categorise people who identify as trans and have completed an open response question about their trans status. The categories were developed based on the most common responses to the question in the census 2022. The framework should not be interpreted to mean there are a particular number of genders. It should only be used as a guide to classify responses to the recommended trans status question in surveys.
Thank you. That concludes general questions. The next.
That can conclude absolute gobbledygook, Eva.
I'm sorry, but I just don't understand what she said, and clearly neither did she, and she obviously thought it was really funny. It's not funny. It is bordering on the utterly ridiculous pantomime level, and she knows that. Everybody in that room and everybody watching knows that. There are two genders, two sexes. Everything else is dangerous kidology and fantasy. And the dreadful contradiction there is, on the one hand, we've got a government minister, a very highly paid, very well paid government minister, confirming there are but two genders. And then she goes on to confirm what she's denying, which is that the Scottish Government issued guidance saying that there were at least 24. Not actually 24 in total, but at least 24. This nonsense has got to stop.
One hopes. Also this week, Phil, Alec was laid to rest. There's talk there will be a memorial service. It was a family service, rightly so, but there's to be a memorial service. And here's the classic. Sturgeon says she won't attend because she's a range of emotions and she doesn't know how she could find to feel any grief. And she couldn't do it properly, knowing what she knows. One, disgusting in the week that he's been buried, she does this, but two, she's trying to make it as usual all about her.
What's new? I mean, the traitor was barred. That's the story. She's not permitted to go. No, we didn't want her there. We, the people, do not want this traitor to turn up to the man that she should go to jail over what she's done to Alex Salmond, what she was involved in. She should go to prison for what she's done. And I think everyone in the legal profession has got a fair idea of what that was all about, that case was all about. Yet we're still not allowed to name these women, the alphabeti women who made these false allegations against Alex. That's wrong. Justice needs to be seen to be done, and I'm behind it. I'll support it. I'll contribute. No problems here. We need to speak the truth. That's the hardest thing, and it's the only way to admit you've got a problem is the only way you can deal with it and then move on. And right now our problem is that the infiltration of the SNP is so deep and so damning and so cutting that they are ineffective as a government, that they are counterproductive to those who seek to free our country and our people. They are so much compromised that they actually fabricated a stitch-up. They were complicit in the fabrication of a stitch-up to persecute the one person who could really lead us to independence. No quarter. No mercy. They must all go down. I'm absolutely appalled at this. And the fact that the brass neck this shyster has, she has no shame. She still thinks she's relevant. I actually don't want to talk about her. I think she's so irrelevant now. The only thing that she serves as an example of how good MI5 and the 77th Brigade are, how good the British establishment is at putting their claws into people and turning them and making them do what they want, not what they're voted in by the people to do or what they purport to do. She's an embarrassment. She's weak. She's spineless. She lacks principles. She's a disgrace, and she should never. I'd ban her. I'd banish her. Throw her out of the country. Let's do that.
The other thing she doesn't have is loyalty, and it's you need that. But on that, the way she behaved, Lloyd. But the second part, because the clock's clicking on, I want to get in this bit as well. She tried to make it about her. Oh, I can't go. As Phil says, no one wants you there. I'm sure Moira would be saying, "Oh no, Hen, you're not crossing the threshold." But here's the other one. It's come out this week that her testimony she gave to Hamilton, and it's taken 2.5 years to get it out. There's a question, and when asked if we could now, with what's come out, we should have a judicial, a judge-led review. Mr. Swinney, of course, he's not going to allow any probe by a judge-led. He's going to protect her the whole way.
Yes, but who is he really protecting? John doesn't want an inquiry of any kind. I mean, not even by the Boy Scouts, because central to it is John sat in a room with the civil servants going through the documentation with the redacting pen. That's what prevented the information getting to the Information Commissioner. That's what prevented the information getting to the parliamentary inquiry, and that's what prevented Alex Salmond's defence team to being able to get access to documents that they required in the civil case. Now, that's just a fact, and everybody knows this. As you said earlier, Roddy, there's no shortage of people in the legal community know exactly what went on during this period. But we have this omerta from mainstream media where they don't put two and two together because it would be inconvenient for them. I mean, maybe also it's something to do with the fact that we barely have a single political correspondent in the entire country. That has been proved in spades by their reaction to the death of the former First Minister, Alex Salmond, and some of the trash that they wrote. But, how long is John going to be able to protect himself under the guise of protecting the party? Because I'm sure he stands and looks in the mirror. I've known John long enough. Stand in the mirror and go, I'm not protecting me, I'm protecting the party. I'm not protecting me, I'm protecting the party. It's pathetic, John. It's the behaviour of someone who's deeply, deeply, deeply deluded. But then again, I reckon the vast majority of John's cabinet, if not all the senior elected members of the Scottish National Party, have been in a delusion since Nicola Sturgeon became the First Minister, and they've been in an even bigger delusion since she stood down, because now they don't know what to do except John. John knows how to look after John. That's why there will be no inquiry. But maybe that might be part of his negotiations with Sarwar that they are clearly entering into at the moment, getting cosy with the Labour Party for a possible coalition in 2026. And will that be John's price? Will John's price be no judge-led inquiry, Anas? No, Anas, don't put me in the dock. Oh, Anas, don't ruin my reputation. John, you haven't got a reputation. It burned to the ground about 3 years ago.
I got a reputation, we know the kind he wants. Eva, she's not going to go to she's made the decision, she says, not to go, which I don't think is true. I'm no fool. I think she was told, don't even think about it, Hen. And John Swinney, covering up for her, doesn't want to have it. Where's the transparency? Wasn't Holyrood meant to be all about transparency and new politics? And it was the People's Parliament, and nothing like this would happen, Eva. Was that not the original plan?
Well, the plan was, as you know, that they were in Edinburgh, they were close at hand, and if they didn't behave themselves, we could people them with stains. That was what was said. The reality turns out, we're a government led by the party that all of us here supported for decades. I mean, probably if you add up our collective service to the SNP, we're going to run into centuries just about in years. And it is such a disappointment to see the way they've conducted themselves in recent times. And what is especially irritating is when politicians who are not even secondary or third rate use a certain sort of spin to try to divert attention away from where the focus ought to be. So you saw that the headline that you had there was John Swinney saying that people ought not to question the integrity of James Hamilton. Nobody has. James Hamilton's reputation is intact. He is not for sale. His soul is not for sale. The same cannot be said of very many people involved in his investigation, not least they who cannot be named, who was redacted ad infinitum. But maybe, you know, if you can count from 1 to 8 and a space in between, you might be able to work out who you think that person might be. But that person who was running the secretariat for James Hamilton, who was conveying information from the government to James Hamilton and from James Hamilton with their spin on it back to the government, is a person who in the fullness of time will be named. Many people have worked out who that person is. That person will one day have their identity revealed publicly, but for the time being, what ought to happen is James Hamilton should be asked his view on the nature of the information provided, who provided it to him, and what spin does he think was put on his processing and his conduct of the inquiry, and what does he think about the fact that the person who was assisting him in the secretariat at the same time also had a very high position within service to the Scottish Government. If that is not a conflict of interest, what is?
While you're there, Eva, thanks for the answer, but while you're there, you know me and I don't believe in coincidences, but on the week that Alec was buried, this. Now, were they at last listening, or was their purpose now gone?
Their purpose was gone. Were they listening, they would never have had that part in the bill in the first place, because they knew perfectly well that what they were proposing was not what Lady Dorian in her research and her consultation actually recommended happen. She suggested a trial, but the trial that she suggested was not the trial that was then proposed by the government. They departed quite dramatically from her proposals, and they did that to put the wind up certain people, not the least of which I would imagine would have been Alex Salmond. And they did it because what they wanted to threaten was a rerun or another witch hunt, as we've already seen. There will have been other people that were in the frame too. And this is what happens when power is concentrated in the hands of too few individuals who are poorly motivated. I think, though, that great commendations are deserved by organisations including the Law Society, the Faculty of Advocates, the Glasgow Bar Association, the Edinburgh Agents, and the Criminal Bar Associations. But the fact that it took so long for there to be a climb down, I'm like you and Don Corleone, I don't believe in coincidences. That was not.
No, correct. The clock's beating us in, was going, but there's a couple of things I'm definitely going to get. I don't care if we're on until next Sunday, but we're going to get them in. Now, during the 2014 referendum, Phil, you remember how angry we got when President Obama stepped in and said, I hope, I'm not interfering, but don't vote yes, sort of thing. We got really angry about it. Now, this week, this idiot, and I'm not talking about Trump, goes and backs Kamala Harris and Walt's guy. Now, it doesn't matter about. To me, whether it's Trump or whether it's Harris, it's either death by firing squad or death by lethal injection. The couple of them, just to me, they're just, they're frightening, both of them. But no First Minister should be interfering or making a comment on another nation's election, and particularly when it's the United States, and particularly when it's, shall we say, someone like Mr. Trump, who is renowned for bringing grudges to bear.
Absolutely, and the fact that he's Scottish, we should be making something out of, His dad's German, his mum's from the islands.
Yeah, you're right. The Irish have done it with John F. Kennedy and Biden and others.
We should be doing this. We should, because he will be president again. And this is not democratic in the first place. You could argue it's populism at best, but in fact, it's just doing what you're told. That's what John's doing. He's just doing what he's told. If you want, he is an idiot. Idiot's the correct word. You're a clown, John. You're a waste of space. If you ever wanted to understand who pulls his strings, this is the British Union policy.
Absolutely.
The policy of the warmonger to retain the puppets. See, the difference between Trump, he's his own unique liar, but the professional liars on the Hill, the families of Clintons, the professionals that are all the previous presidents, they come from a long line of professionally trained liars and shysters. I would vote, given the chance, for the misogynist, narcissistic, lying Trump over any puppet, for one overarching and simple reason. In his last term in office, he did not take the US to war, and we do not want war. Where people quote Obama as some kind of saviour, wake up, folks. He had a separate bombing campaign of countries for each of his 8 years in office and won a Nobel Peace Prize. You tell me our institutions are not corrupted. Bollocks.
Yeah, it's Lloyd, as I say, it's just not protocol. You know, discretion is what's required in matters like this. Diplomacy, it's absolute stupidity. Whether it's, you know, you think she's the greatest thing since sliced bread or not, you don't say it if you're First Minister of Scotland or First Minister of Wales or the First Minister of Northern Ireland. In fact, I would suggest that the Prime Minister shouldn't either. But John's come out all several times in the last few months in the British position.
Yeah, very much so. But then we have to remember that the only First Minister we've had who understood that because we are not a nation state, that we're a devolved government within another state, that you don't get involved in international politics, or rather you are extremely careful in what you say, because you must not compromise your path to independence. And more importantly, you don't want to make life difficult for yourself when there is no benefit. I mean, the first rule of politics is keep your mouth shut if you're going to run the risk of saying something that will come back to bite you, right? Now, John's following in the line of Nicola Sturgeon. Nicola Sturgeon committed Scotland to a complete support for Ukraine within 2 or 3 months of the special military operation coming underway. Now, did she consult with anybody? Maybe Hillary Clinton. But she stated the position of this country. None of them should be allowed to do that. Alex Salmond, when he was First Minister, chose not to make statements on these issues. Chose not to for very good reasons. He spoke about things like earthquakes, flood, famine, natural disasters.
But he did mention the bombing in Serbia, though, Lloyd.
That's what I was coming to, Roddy.
Oh, beg your pardon.
Before he was First Minister. In fact, before the Scottish Parliament sat for the first time. You know, Alex said that the bombing of Kosovo, the bombing of Belgrade, particularly, was completely wrong in international law, and that is absolutely true. And he was dragged over the coals not only by the unionist media, but by despicable creatures within his own party, including Dennis MacLeod and Michael Russell. And I think giving a nod along was John Swinney as well. Now, when it comes right down to it, if we are to be a country, a member of the United Nations, an independent part of the world community, then what you don't do is you start interfering or taking sides in big global issues. You do not do that. You keep your cards close to your chest. The less you say in diplomacy, the better. And the fact is, we're not in a world of diplomacy. And John Swinney is not a diplomat. And you know, when it comes right down to it, these people have to be reminded they do not have the right to speak for us on big moral issues for very good reasons. They are a morally bankrupt government, as has been proved by their actions and their behaviour over the death of the previous First Minister, Alex Salmond. The fact that they had no protocol in place, the fact that they turned their eyes to the wall and allowed someone else to come in and take up the responsibility. The fact that they could not understand that seeing the send-off from North Macedonia that was organised by an independent government within 12 hours of his death was quite extraordinary. And they couldn't even have a motorcycle escort at the airport. These people have no morality and they have no right, absolutely no right to speak on behalf of this country in terms of foreign policy, and most especially not on the issue of elections.
No. As well, Eva, it's just wrong. The First Minister shouldn't be doing that.
Well, I think that we need to consider this as you would if you dropped a stone in a pond and you watch the ripple effect. Scotland needs friends internationally, and we will particularly need international allies when we attain that supermajority at the next Holyrood election, because when we have a majority of MSPs elected to secure independence, and when we've also won a majority of the popular vote, and we're standing there pleading with the United Nations, we don't want people to be looking at Scotland and saying, oh, hold the bus. Not that long ago, they were taking sides in the American election or in anybody else's election, because it's just plain wrong. So we need to have an eye to the future, and we need to make sure that our actions at home and abroad constantly promote Scotland and Scottish interests, and particularly do all that we can to bolster the cause for Scottish independence. So short-sighted throwaway lines, it's just been Halloween where we like to, in Scotland particularly, we refer to neeps, tumshies, turnips, you call them that. Little did I think that we would have a neep in power as the First Minister of Scotland.
Yeah, and finishing up on this, because this is the important thing, despite everything that's going on, Phil, everything that's going on, no campaigning, we're getting the boot stuck in, and this is especially now, we get a lot of viewers who are of a unionist persuasion. They come here to be given some education, and they like to put in things. This is especially for you. This is this week, boys, for you wee unionists. Even with all that's going on, since Alec, we're 52%, with no campaign, Phil, with nothing been done in 10 years, with all the boots that are getting stuck into us, with everything, the full British state against us, and yet 52% of our population, without a campaign, without an electoral event, they want independence. We've got to work on
it. That's the sad thing. Without working on it, we're at 52%. We've got it. We'd have done it. And that's, we went from 28%, I think it was around about there, or 26, can't remember. 28% when Alex first kicked this off. And this is why the dream will never die. It's why he was right, and why the legacy will never be forgotten. He has taken us most of the way there, and he will never be forgotten for what he's done. He'll never be forgotten. It's phenomenal. But to be 50, we went to 51% just a couple of weeks before the referendum, and then it was down to 45 after they threw the kitchen sink at us. They only allowed it to happen. It was only permitted because they never thought in a million years we would have the audacity to stand up, or the wit, or the wisdom, or the understanding that actually, we can run our own affairs a lot better than you shysters. That has dawned on the majority of the people in Scotland. Now, and Nicola, and if you ever want evidence that Nicola and her ilk are traitors, this is it. You have been given, as I said before, the golden keys to an independent Scottish nation, and you sold them. Because how many mandates do you need? He got one crack at the title, took it, the long shot, and almost delivered. You had 6 straight approaches, multiple options you could have done. There's lots of different ways you could have done it, but you failed to do it. And for me, the message for you Yuns out there, Swinney's in the same government pocket that the traitor Nicola was in. It's no surprise, that when Swinney denied this judge-led inquiry, because that would show them for what they are, and the game that was played and the cheating that was done. Waste of space. The unions, there's only 4 reasons, I would say, why you would be a unionist. Ignorance, bigotry and sectarianism, arrogance, or greed. I'm all right, as I'm in the union, Jack. Idiot.
52%, Lloyd, with nothing been done for 10 years. It's quite incredible for a start. It is incredible. But there's something to work on there, and we've got to.
Absolutely. I mean, Roddy, I think the 52%, I've believed that we've been at that for a very long time, because the energy, the education, the inspiration that came from the campaign in 2014 wasn't wholly dissipated. And I think to some degree it's a measure of how Alex Salmond touched the people of this country, that when that survey was done, the memory of 2014 and the response to his untimely demise, I believe, is reflected in that. But more importantly, this is the fruits of the labours of 2014. It will dissipate. We have to make sure that we take the actions required before it dissipates completely. Or am I wrong? And we've actually gone beyond the tipping point, and it's not going to go back. You know, this is the point. The only way we'll be able to find that out is if we can get a serious approach to the 26th election, a serious approach where all the independence parties come together, that we stand as a Scotland united, as we stand as the people united for the people. And those that would stand in the way of that, and I think everybody will know who I mean by this, really need to have a look in the mirror and recognise, do they wish to be on the wrong side of history? Do you wish your grandchildren to be reading about the fact that you abandoned and lost your country because of your own personal venality? I would hope not.
Yeah, I would hope as well, but some of them, not so sure, Lloyd. 52%, Eva. I actually believe if we out and got campaigning, I think the eventual, and I've said it before, long before this, I think we'll be high into the 60s when the actual, however it's voted, whether it's a plebiscite, whatever the heck it is, it won't be a referendum, but I think over 60% will vote for it.
What I find really interesting is that the number of people that are coming to me, to the rest of us here, and to other friends within the movement and saying, let's get a move on, we need to get something done. There's a lot of talk behind the scenes, and I think that it is highly likely that the SNP understand perfectly well that they are really signing their own death warrant if they continue to conduct themselves in the way that they are. But I would like to end on a positive note. You'll remember I've quoted this here before, when Alec had said, this party, the Scottish Party, the National Party, carries your hope and we shall carry it carefully. That's because he had in mind that what he would do with a referendum, with independence, was that Holyrood would become, in essence, the People's Parliament. And I think it's high time that the people of Scotland understood absolutely that that Parliament is there to look after the people of Scotland, to make Scotland a better place. And the people deserve the right, to the entitlement to elect politicians with integrity who are absolutely determined to take Scotland forwards to independence. And I think that penny's dropping on a daily basis, that it's not what we've got just now, but it is what we will have at the next Holyrood election, provided that we have unity within the movement and we forget arguments temporarily in relation to gender reform or NATO or the currency or whatever the hell it is, and we simply say, get the job done, independence, and when we've got our independence, then we sort out the other stuff.
I agree, here. Well, folks, that's us at the end of this week's show. I hope you've enjoyed it, but I've got good news. We're coming back with a midweek show. I'm joined by two gingers. Is that right, Mr. Quinnan? Two ginger, with all sorts of comparisons. But one of the reasons is because it's the things that you don't get told that I've often said is the biggest crime of our media. And this is one of them. And you wouldn't have seen this much. The Russian foreign minister says, if Ukraine joins NATO, either Ukraine disappears or NATO disappears. They ain't bluffing. And I think it's something we need to talk about, because we might have 52%, but we might not be here if the warmongers get their way. So we're going to be talking about that on Wednesday and what's happening in the Middle East. And we'll look forward to seeing you then. But until we see you all again, whenever that may be, may you and yours please take care.
Through a Scottish prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.